Let's consider the implementation of the following example. We want to create a class palindrome, and within that class we want to create a static method isPalindrome, taking one parameter of type string. This method returns true if the string is a palindrome and false otherwise. We like also to be able to look at palindromic numbers. So in that case, we want to be able to enter as a parameter a whole number. In this case, it can be an int or a long. By doing so, we need to create 3 different methods, all of them with the same name. So in fact, we're going to overload the method isPalindrome. But before we look at the Java implementation, let's refresh our memory using the Python implementation. In the Python implementation, I need to create a module. Let's call it palindrome.py. Within that module, I need to create a function. Let's call that function isPalindrome. That function takes one parameter, and let's call that parameter data. This parameter should be able to be of type int or of type string. Otherwise, I will return false. So I need that if-elif, just to be able to test if it is of type int or of type string. When I've done so, I can convert that into lowercase. So we are sure that if we've got uppercase, lowercase mixed in the string, it's still going to return a palindrome if it's a palindrome. Then I'm going to use a for loop to go through all the elements and compare it with the penultimate element and so on. If I can find two characters which are not the same, then I will return false. Otherwise, at the end of the for loop, if I wasn't able to disprove that it was a palindrome, I will return true. Just for similarity with Java, I created another function called main. And here, just to be able to do my test in some way. And this main method is going to have a print statement and check with different values. So we see that the first statement are to test for a string, and then I'm going to test with numbers of different length. I use 4 different numbers because the first one will be represented by an int in Java, the second one by an int in Java, the third and fourth number will be represented by a long in Java. So it's to draw some similarities between Python and Java. Having done so now, let's look at the implementation in Java. So first, I'm going to create a class palindrome, public class palindrome. Then I'm going to create a main method, just to be able to test my different solution. Here I'm going to use a shortcut in VS Code. So I'm going to start to type main, and then I'm going to select that option main. It's going to provide for me the header of the main function, of the main method. This is very useful. Then I'm going to copy the different system.out.println, similar to what I've done in Python. So in that case, it will look like this. And you can see here, I've got my different string, then I've got my int, and then I've got my long numbers over here, finishing with the letter L to signify it's a long number. But for the moment, I've got a lot of errors here because I haven't defined the method isPalindrome yet. So let's comment that out for the time being. First thing I need to do now is to define my static method. So I'm going to start to type public. And then I can see here I've got different options, which are quite useful. So I'm going to click on that one because I want to create a static method. It's going to ask me if I want to have a void value as a return value or if I want to have a specific type. Here, in this case, I want to return a Boolean. So I'm going to type Boolean. Then the name is going to be isPalindrome. Then I'm going to have the parameter here. The parameter is of type string. And I call it data to be similar to what I've done in Python. One thing I commonly do is to type return false in that case, by default. Okay? The idea here is just to see if I don't have any syntax error or compile error at that stage. My function doesn't do much, but at least I know that the format for the moment is correct. So now let's try to tackle the proper implementation. I want to transform data into a lowercase string, just to make it more easier to handle. So I'm going to create a variable string. Let's call that lower, which is going to be equal to data. And here I'm going to type the dot, and I can see that the auto-completion can help me. And here I'm going to start to type 2, and I can see that there is a function to lowercase. That's going to return a string in lowercase. So I'm going to complete that, and I'm going to have the lowercase value of data within lower variable. Now I need to use a for loop. So for, and here I'm going to have an index to be able to go through all the different positions within my string. Let's call that I. So I is going to start at 0. And I'm going to continue my loop as long as I is less than the string lower dot length. And I'm going to increment it one by one. Note that I could have done something similar as the one I've done in Python by dividing by 2. So I don't have to go through all the characters in my string. Within that loop, I just need to check if the first character is equal to the last one, the second character to the penultimate one, and so on. So I need to have an if statement, if lower at a given position, at, here the index is I, is not equal to lower at a given position. So here the position is going to be lower dot length minus 1 minus I. If it's not equal to the element at position y, I know it's not a palindrome, so I can return false. If at the end of that loop I couldn't disprove it wasn't a palindrome, then I need to return true. And I'm done with that first version. So let's try to see if it's working with my string implementation. Now I can see there is no error when I'm going to compile that. So let's do the play. And here I see that radar is true and ABC DBA is false. So far so good. Now I need to try to tackle with an int. So I need to create another function with an int. But here I want to reuse the code I've done so far. So what I can do is public. I'm going to do the same thing. It's going to return a boolean. Then the name is going to be is palindrome. And here you can see I've got some help from the editor. So I just have to type return to be able to have the is palindrome function. Now I'm going to define what are the parameters. And here I'm going to overload that method. So I need to have a different type of parameter. And the type will be int. And I can give the same name if I wish to. Having done so now, I want to be able to reuse what I've done before. That will be good if I could convert my int into a string. And then I can use the is palindrome I've defined before with that string. So I can do that using the integer class. So return is palindrome. And here, data need to be converted into a string. So I'm going to use the integer. And then I've got a method toString, which is pretty useful for me, which take an int as a parameter. In that case, I can put data. It's going to convert that into a string. Then that string is going to be going to the method isPalindrome, and it's going to return the value true or false, depending if the number was a palindromic number. So let's try that with these two. I'm going to execute the code. I can see that this time it's working true for 1, 2 to 1, but false for the other number, which is correct. Guess what? When I want to tackle the long number, I'm going to do something similar. So what I can do, be careful when you are doing that, is copy paste. And then instead of having an int, I need to have a long. You can see that if I have exactly the same signature here between these two methods, I'm going to have a compilation error. So let's go over it. Here you can see that I've got a message from the editor telling me that I've got a duplicate method isPalindromeInt. As soon as I'm going to change that into the value long, that error is going to disappear. However, here I'm going to have an error. It's going to tell me that I cannot do that with a long. I need to have an integer. Okay? So in that case, I've got an equivalent class called long, which is going to have a toString method to convert a long number into a string. And then I'm going to return that result. So you can see that I wrote isPalindrome once and I'm reusing it for the other call. Sometimes I need to do a little bit more work, but in this case, it's pretty straightforward. And let's try that with a long number. How can I check that this one is already a long number compared to an int? If I remove the L over here, I'm going to have an error here. Here it's going to tell me that the literal 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on is out of range for the type int. As soon as I put L, it's going to consider that as a long, and now I'm within the range of long numbers in Java. So having done so, let's try to run the program again. And here I can see that, again, it is working properly for a long number. So overloading methods sometimes is pretty useful to provide more functionality for your class. However, it may not be that difficult because sometimes I can reuse one of the methods I've written before. As you can see, within the method isPalindrome, I can call one previous version of this method using the call isPalindrome with a different type. So this is very useful and something you should remember. So as you can see, when I'm going to compare that with the Python version, I've got only one definition of a function in Python, but I need to define what are the different things I need to do depending on the type. Whereas in Java, I can have overloading method with different signature. The signature of this function is isPalindrome string. The signature of this function is isPalindromeInt. And the signature of this method is isPalindrome long. So in fact, I'm going to provide as much flexibility as possible within a class using method overloading.